Hello and welcome to the Football League Weekly podcast. And today we are joined by Dan of the Royals Review podcast, and we have got a brilliant show lined up for you today. So, first of all, Dan, introduce the audience to your podcast. Where can they find you? And a random question, but what's it been like following the club the last couple of years?
Yeah, of course. So you nailed it. Royals Review Pod is a podcast I started at the start of this season with my best friend who I've known for 20 plus years, which is quite wild to say out loud. We figured that we spend most of our time talking about Reading FC anyway, so that it wouldn't be too much extra hassle to film it and put it out there to see if anyone fancy joining us. As I say, it's in its infancy at the moment, so it's a slow burner. But we're covering every game and doing our best to cover the situation at Reading, which I will obviously come on to. In terms of finding us, all the normal places, really. We do film it, much like yourself, so it's on YouTube, Spotify, and our biggest presence is on X or Twitter, if you're still calling it that. Royals Review Pod, I think it's in my little name tag at the bottom. So, yeah, go check us out if you're interested in the situation at Reading, or want to hear our thoughts on how Reading are getting on, which, yeah, no spoilers, but it's actually okay at the moment. So it's quite a positive place, aside from the ownership issues for us at the moment.
The one thing that I was most curious about when watching your podcast and watching everything that you do is the obvious, and the elephant in the room is the fact that you are going through ownership issues at the moment. What has it been like making a podcast about Reading whilst you have, of course, had the off the field issues? Has it kind of like been very much a project of getting the issues out there, if that makes sense?
Yeah, for sure. I think as fans, it's really, really tough in this situation because you are pretty much useless is not the right word, but there's not much you can do or we can do to help this situation other than create content, create a bit of buzz around it, basically make people aware. Because okay, you might see the game against Port Vale that we got abandoned by people going on the pitch, or you may see the tennis balls last season, but really, I feel like generally the coverage of our situation, given how severe it is, has been relatively poor. And we do have some organisations like Sell Before We Die. I don't know if you guys have seen them. I'm sure you probably have because they've done a great job at creating exposure, but are focused solely on giving exposure to our situation. And yeah, they continue to do that. So I have to give loads of credit to them. They do a really good job on that front. But in terms of podcasting, like we try where possible to be positive, which football wise at the moment is not that difficult to do. Ownership wise has been really tough since we started at the start of the season. But even guys that were doing it last season, I think it's almost exactly a year now since Dai said he wanted to sell the club. Yeah, said it out loud that he was going to and that he wanted to sell the club. So it's been, yeah, almost 365 days since that happened. And I'm sure we'll go through it, but there's been a lot that's happened in that time. There's been hope, there's been despair, there's even been like a little bit of laughter along the way because some of the stuff is absolutely bonkers, and you really couldn't make it up. So yeah, roller coaster is the best way of putting it. As I say, we always try and put a positive spin on it, and we see it as doing our role of giving exposure to the situation, but also just keeping it in the conversation, and just yeah, like us posting on Twitter all the time about it, keeping fans updated because a lot of the time as well, unfortunately, there's some accounts I probably aren't just Reading specific, but use the situation to um, almost fund their own agenda, and quite often that's negative. So we always try to be as factually correct as possible. We don't ever claim to be in the know or anything like that. We just report on things that we deem as fact, because there are a lot of in the know accounts that publish lots of fake news and scaremongering, and it does have an impact on fans. And yeah, as I'll probably touch on, like it's been such a tough time that I'm sure. I mean, it myself included. It has had a negative mental health impact on a lot of our fans. So that stuff doesn't help. But maybe listening to our podcast, certainly not going to claim that we're amazing at boosting mental health. But we try to put a positive spin on things so that we don't negatively impact people. But that's obviously tough in the situation that we're in.
And I guess one positive thing to come out of the situation is the fact that it has probably built more of a community spirit around Reading as well. So have you maybe noticed more of a coming together between Reading fans due to this, due to the situation?
Yeah, absolutely. Ever since we were relegated from the Premier League, so I'm casting your minds back like a fair while now, attendances and everything that goes with it was in a steady decline, as you'd expect as you get relegated. And obviously, that happened again in League One. But recently, we've started to see the attendances on the up again. Don't get me wrong; we're not selling out every week, and we're not getting tens of thousands. Well, we're probably getting around an average of 10,000, which I think for a club in our position is pretty strong. But yeah, I think across like social media platforms, for example, people are constantly checking in on each other. There's a lot of commentary throughout on X and things like that. So there definitely is a community spirit, and I think one of the real big key factors to that has been Ruben Sellers. He has galvanized he's galvanized the club on the whole. He's been super loyal. He's been super strong in everything he does, and I think he's getting the players fighting, which I'm sure we'll talk about the players and the team and everything at the moment. But he's created a team that people want to go and support, and I think that's really important when you really don't want to support the ownership. You really almost like the club almost gets removed from it because they're so aligned with the ownership. They're like, we just want to support the 11 players plus and the coach. And Ruben Sellers has done a really, really strong job at making that team the perfect team for that, if that makes any sense. So, yeah, I'd say in short, there is an increased community feel. To be fair, ever since I've been a Reading fan, it's been quite a community-based club. It's always been quite family-friendly, and yeah, I mean, like I've always gone with my family and all of my friends. Like it's always been that kind of club. But I have noticed an increase since the kind of disaster of Dai Yongge.
So let's cast our minds back to 2017 when Dai Yongge first came into the club. Whilst doing my research, I was very surprised to find out that he tried to buy Reading back when you were in the Premier League, but the Premier League failed to basically agree to him coming in due to the fit and proper owners test that they have implemented in the Premier League. So when he first came in, were there any concerns at all about his suitability in maybe his role as owner?
Yeah, 100%. Not only the that failed attempt to buying us in the Premier League, but I'm pretty certain he had an attempt to buy Hull that was also turned down. I may be wrong there, but I'm pretty sure, which has also rung alarm bells. But even worse than that, he'd already sent two clubs, albeit not in the UK. I don't even know what the words are to fold, like to die. But again, like I am not going to say any nice words about Dai Yongge on this podcast, but the issues had already started before he took over. Basically, ever since Sir John Medeski passed on the baton, the runnings of the club have been in decline. But yeah, never as bad as this. And yeah, as sad as it is, the signs were there from the off with Dai Yongge. And Reading fans have spent a lot of time actually quite angry at the EFL for failing to spot the issues. Given like it seems ridiculous after you say the Premier League turned him away, but all of a sudden he's fit and proper to buy us. But look, that's where we're at. We've kind of come to terms with it now, although still very annoying. And I do believe that Rich Parry and the guys at the EFL, sorry, have put in a lot of effort into making the fit and proper test more robust. So I don't want to take this opportunity to have a dig at them, but yeah, very annoying from the outset that he was deemed fit to take over at Reading.
So the problems, in my opinion anyway, first started when Dai tried to get Reading back into the Premier League, spending way more than he was allowed. As a result, the club's finances ultimately spiraled out of control. Should the EFL have made more of an effort to maybe raise alarm bells about this? Because surely, if you look at his spending back then, it wasn't going to end well.
Yeah, goodness, I've almost like, because so much has happened recently, I'd almost forgot about the spending spree that we went on back then with the likes of Sonia Luko for 10 million, I think. Which again, I don't want to take this opportunity to badmouth him, but he's not worth £10 million. And it's weird though, because at the time, I guess I never really looked at it as alarming. I looked at it as Reading doing what quite a lot of teams do in rolling the dice, spending the money in the hope that you go up. If you don't go up, okay, there are issues, but if you do go up, it seems like a smart play. So at the time, I was like, okay, yeah, you can kind of see what we're doing here. It's nice to see the club spending money. Like, we've never, well, in my lifetime, we've never been a club that have spent ridiculous amounts on players. I mean, to be fair, I guess a lot of clubs can say that until recently, when the money stuff has kind of gone mental. Um, but yeah, so yeah, it was more when we didn't go up that I was like, we could be in serious trouble here with the amount that we've been spending across the board. There were question marks, as I say, when some of the personnel being brought in and price tags that were aligned with them. I was sort of thinking, that's, we probably overpaid there. Yeah, as I say, that feels like ages ago compared to what we've dealt with recently. So I hadn't even thought of that would be a question today.
So, one of the most concerning things for me was the fact that Dai used one of his friends and super agent, Kai Jobachan, whose name I probably absolutely butchered, as a hand for some of the club's transfers. Were you ever concerned about some of the individuals in the backroom that Dai had brought into the club? Because if you look at the structure of the club when Dai came in and started spending the money, it wasn't looking good, and he hadn't done a good job bringing in the right people at all.
Yeah, mate, absolutely. Like, I'm not even going to attempt his name because I'll definitely do a worse job than you have. But so many question marks about the guys being brought in. Not only players he was an agent of, but also like backroom staff, manager. Like, I'm pretty sure that Paul Ince did a podcast recently that like he just walked the job because he was mates with Kia, which, I mean, it's really not what you want to be hearing when you love a club and they're going through bad times and they are giving arguably the most important job in that football club to one of their mates who, I mean, Ince doesn't not have the credentials, but I've never been overly impressed with his performances at any of the clubs he's been at. So that's really worrying. But that said, though, like, when you're in our position, some of the names that we were getting linked with as a result of, you do sort of think, oh, okay, that one might work out. He's half decent. I may get picked off here by some of the other Reading fans, but I can't really think of anyone that we've taken as a result of our partnership, if that's the right word, with Kia, that I've been happy that we've done it and that's worked out to be a success. So yeah, another horrible figure in this whole pantomime, really.
So, let's also talk about Dai's habits as well, because he rarely spent any time at Reading. He never attended any home games. He preferred to gamble at high-end casinos in Mayfair, as opposed to, like going to the club or following its matches. That is absolutely disastrous. And are you surprised that alarm bells weren't even raised by the media at that point? Because in my opinion, it was only the last 2-3 years really that the media started picking up on the situation and started raising alarm bells themselves.
Yeah, mate, absolutely. Like, again, I'm sure we'll come on to it because we're kind of going in chronological order here, but it really took for the points deductions to get, I'd even argue, above 10 for people to really start reporting on any of this. And as you say, like the not attending matches, the total disregard from Dai Yongge almost from the outset is actually incredible when you look at it. Not only Yong, but Pang, and even Nigel Howe. I mean, again, I don't have too many nice words for Nigel Howe either. Slightly better than the other two, but total disregard from those guys, which is incredible really when you think we're going through tough times and they're not even showing up, and obviously the casino stuff is just comedy really. Like you can't make that up. And then it still goes on to this day. I mean, I almost understand why he doesn't turn up now, because it's not going to be nice for him. The fans are solely going to go for him, but he's never been like that, and it's disappointing from the off to not show up for the club that you thought that you should really have an interest in more than just a financial interest. But there we go. I think that's all it's ever been for Dai's financials.
So do you think Dai has ever really had any interest in selling the club? Because back in January, the EFL had told him to sell the club. They had given him more or less like an ultimatum as to when he should be selling the club, but nothing has really happened ever since. And we'll talk about the recent kind of like new ownership saga that has developed in the last couple of months. But do you reckon he ever really had an active interest in selling the club?
It's such a tough question, right? Because it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but I'll never know, and no one will ever know, because he's so secretive, and I imagine he has lawyers that are very strong and will have everyone under lock and key. So all the NDAs will be signed, and no one will ever be able to let on as to how disastrous it has been. But he definitely hasn't tried that hard to sell the club. Okay, maybe he's trying a little bit harder now, arguably, but for a long time he definitely wasn't. And I imagine that's largely down to the fact that when we were getting the points deductions and fines for not paying taxes and all that kind of silly stuff, that he was still pricing Reading as way too high. I think he's currently looking for 30 million. I believe he was looking for 50 million at the very start of this, which, look, I love Reading with my whole heart, but it's probably not worth 50 million as a club. And in fact, probably very few clubs outside of the Premier League, maybe bottom half of the Championship, are worth that much and will probably make a loss. So they're not exactly the most appealing financial investments. But a lot of the names that were bandied around first, suggesting he was keen to sell the club, I would fully argue the likes of Mike Ashley et al. Were really hoping that Reading would go into administration so they could pick us up at a really cheap price and go from there. So if I really had to answer that question in short form, I would say he probably wasn't that interested until very recently, where the media's really got involved and the fans are doing their best to embarrass him on an international level, because I think that's sort of where Reading fans have realised it will be their most effective way of getting him to sell the club, is to put his name and face out there, particularly back in China, because I think he's quite a proud man, which is incredible to say out loud after what he's done to our club. But I think that's the one way that Reading fans will get him into action, and I do believe that he's trying harder now than he has been over the last year or so. But how hard that is, still a lot of question marks around. But hopefully he's trying really hard to get it sorted as soon as possible.
And I only asked you that question because Rob Cohig was so close to taking over the club. And at one point it looked as though he had more or less finalised the takeover. Fans were coming up with, like ideas of what Reading in the future could look like under him. But that fell through, and that fell through, in my opinion, because Dai Yongge simply priced him out of the club. So you know more about what happened there than we do. So was Rob Cohig, maybe, if this question makes any sense, was he as close to us taking over the club as the media made him out to be?
I mean, there's nothing to suggest he wasn't, which is a really confusing sentence for people to understand. But his profile picture on X was changed to an image of him outside Reading's training ground. He was working in the Purple Turtle, which, for those of you who aren't aware, is like a really famous bar in Reading that Reading fans kind of call their own and have big events there. And like when we have been promoted in the past as well. Our big promotion parties are and all that kind of stuff. So that's a really important place in Reading for Reading fans. So he's been there. He's been at Reading games in the box, shaking hands and signing fans' memorabilia and things like that. So I think with all that in mind, you have to assume that he was as close as it was made out. Obviously, as I've already alluded to, like we will never know. We'll never know who's at fault here. Obviously, we can make our own minds up. And there is obviously one side of it who has built up no credibility at all. So most people will look and blame Dai, and I'm probably the same, if I'm perfectly honest. There are rumours that Rob Coig was chopping away at his price, which is obviously not going to please Dai Yongge, particularly as I've already said. He was already coming down on his evaluation across the year, but that hasn't been verified at all. So whether or not you believe that is completely up to you. But it's heartbreaking, really, because there you've got a guy who has experience owning a League One club in Wycombe, a local club to Reading, really, quite successfully. Fans there really, really liked him. He's clearly going to pass, or had already passed, the EFL fit and proper test. He had the money to buy the club. Everything was looking like we were going in the right direction, and it was looking pretty positive until it all fell apart. Which, yeah, it's horrible, but something has obviously gone on there. As I say, we probably never know, but something has obviously gone on there that has either, well, I mean, we do know that the exclusivity period ended, which is why he didn't end up buying the club, but something's obviously gone on there that either Rob's annoyed Dai and it's finished, or Dai's annoyed and it's finished. And I know which I'd assume it was. I can't imagine Dai has been very nice to work with at all. And in fact, I don't know if you've seen, but some of the other guys who have thrown their hat in the ring in the past, well, in the last year, have also started to come forward, being very careful what they say, but suggesting similar that Dai has been very difficult to work with, single-handedly caused these deals to crash. So, yeah, I do believe that it was very close to owning Reading, but yeah, unfortunately, it didn't come into fruition.
So, in the latest kind of like turn of events in the takeover saga, Chinese businessman Benny Kwong has been linked to buying the club. He runs a Hong Kong-based gas company, and he has obviously been in talks with Dai Yongge about buying the club for around about 20 million. Well, that's what I've read on the news anyway. I might be way off there. But to put things into perspective, Benny Kwong is a close friend of Dai Yongge's. They've been business partners in the past. That doesn't fill me with a great deal of hope, Dan. So how does yourself and the Reading fans feel about the ongoing talks between Benny Kwong and Dai Yongge?
Yeah. Well, mate, it's an absolute nightmare, isn't it? Like, I guess you've got to look at this in two ways. All of the things you just said sound horrendous. Like the fact that he's linked with Dai. I actually don't know, but has he had any interest in any football teams in the past? I'm not sure. But then you have to look at it like, does he have the money? Is it going to be better than what we have now? And if that's the case, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'll take it for the here and now. But I can't really look at this happening and be positive about it, because, yeah, alarm bells are ringing like all over the place. And as I already talked about with Kia, I think Reading have done too much of giving things to their friends, or, you know, yeah, we'll take your player because I know his agent, or you can buy this club because you're my friend. It's just not a great way to run a club. And that's been proven already, because that's why we're in the position that we're in. So it's sad, because like, if a new suitor is coming and he's got the money and it's like, oh, he's interested in taking over, my reaction should be brilliant. Like, we're gonna put these days of like these disastrous days behind us. We can start to look forward, as we were doing with Rob Coig. Benny Kwong does not do that at all for me. So I really struggle to get excited about that. I'm also slightly concerned about the reporting of it all, in the sense that I don't know how true these rumours are. There's been so much misinformation reported on Reading that I really wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't even have a single interest, and he's probably just got loads of cash and is mates with Dai Yongge. So I'm really not reading too much into it. But yeah, as I said, I don't like to make opinions of people without ever having met them or even heard of them or anything like that. But yeah, being pals with Dai Yongge doesn't really buy you any credibility in my book, unfortunately.
And finally, before I move on to Rhys, who's going to ask you questions about how Reading are doing in League One at the moment. Tell us about Sell Before We Die, because I'm sure there are people listening to this podcast right now who aren't aware of what Sell Before We Die do, the fantastic job that they've done raising awareness about the current situation at Reading. So Sell Before We Die, what are they doing and how good a job have they done raising awareness about the situation that you're currently in?
Yeah, I think they've done a fantastic job. It's probably worth saying that I have no affiliation with them at all. So everything that I say about them is just my opinion. But I do think that they have done a fantastic job at raising awareness of the situation. For anyone that doesn't know, they are a fan-led protest movement that have basically built themselves to do exactly as I said, to create exposure about this, to lead protests. Safely, respectfully. I don't know if that's the right word, but like what I mean, for example, is that Sellers came out recently and said, please don't interfere with what I'm trying to do here, i.e. please don't go on the pitch and disrupt play. And Sell Before We Die have done a great job then of going, okay, right, well, we can't do that. That's fine. What else can we do? And they hold forums, which I joined last week, assessing options. So yeah, they've done such a good job, honestly. Like I really respect them, and I will always back them whenever I can get involved. They actually did a really good thread today, which I'd recommend anyone go and have a look. And it gives a brief history on Reading, all the details on basically why you, probably not anyone listening here, but why you would want to buy Reading. That's I love seeing that. Like the way that they do things is really clear for non-Reading fans and even non-football fans to have a look, to see what they're doing and understand what's going on and the severity. So yeah, all I can really do in this question is take my hat off to them and say well done. Obviously, the job is not over, and I'm sure they're aware of that more than anyone because Dai Yongge is still the owner of Reading, but they are definitely doing their best at moving things in the right direction and keeping, as I said at the very start, keeping this conversation at the forefront of our club and getting it into national media coverage and all the rest of it. So yeah, hats off to them. I think they're doing a great job.
So now on to Rhys, who is going to ask you questions about how you're performing in League One, the current season at the moment. So on to you, Rhys.
Perfect. So first of all, question is, I think that from the outside looking in, obviously this season when Dai Yongge was still in charge and the saga still goes on, there's a lot of uncertainty when you sort of look in about what the expectations actually are at Reading right now. I think you can look at Ruben Sellers, who's a manager. I rate him extremely highly. You look at the squad, the youth potential within that is very high as well. So we can sit here as neutrals and say, this is a squad that could push for top six if the ownership was better, if the board was better behind that squad. So from a fan's point of view, what's a successful season?
Yeah, it's a really tough question because I was going to say bias aside, but it's not aside at all because it's fully biased. I do think Reading's first 11 up there with the best in this division. Obviously, Birmingham are a different kettle of fish for reasons we all know. But aside from that, I think our first 11 is very strong. And if there was a dream world where none of them could get injured and they could all play every single minute, I have no doubt that we'd finish in the top six in this league. Unfortunately, that dream world doesn't exist. And with the transfer embargo and the ownership that we haven't been able to bring in anyone aside from Kem Campbell on loan. And I think that, I can't remember what the terminology is there, but EFL basically gave us a little bit of grace because Femi Aziz departed late on in that window, and we literally would have not had enough players. So we managed to get him in, but that's it. In terms of a successful season, like, I think at the very beginning of the season, a lot of people would have said survival. And in fact, a lot of pundits that I really respect had Reading down in a relegation battle. Not, I don't think anyone actually had them to be relegated, but down in your sort of 17th, 18th, 19th, similar to where we finished last season. I have always positively, and I predicted that we'd finish 8th. And if we did do that, I think we have to consider that a huge success with all the constraints that we have. But as I say, there is a part of me in the back of my head that is thinking, if we can keep our key players fit and continue the run of form we're on, and big part, keep Ruben Sellers for the whole season, there is half a chance we can make the playoffs here. So I think, realistically speaking, we'll finish somewhere in the mid-table. If things get worse, ownership and maybe even points deductions again, which I really hope doesn't happen, we could be in a relegation fight. And if things stay as they are or even improve, I think playoffs is a realistic goal. But I guess, short answer, mid-table.
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember as Ipswich Town fans, while we were under the regime of Marcus Evans, there was a real big divide in the way that fans felt turn up to Portman Road on a match day. There was almost a sort of divide between fans who were in favour of similar protests to what we've seen with you guys, fans who wanted to sort of keep everything quiet, keep things sort of within the club. So on a match day at the Madejski Stadium, what's the sort of atmosphere like? Is it one where the fans are purely focused on backing the team, backing the manager, who we rate incredibly highly, or is there a sort of animosity in the air as well?
It's a very good question, because it's almost a little bit of everything that you just said. I think a lot of basically all the Reading fans are galvanised in the sense that they are all behind the team and Sellers. I don't think there's anyone that I've come across at games or on social media or anything that is has any bad words to say about any members of the squad or staff is not the right word, but you know what I mean. The coaching staff is what I'm looking for. But there are always, every club has this, right? Like, that I'm a bigger fan than you because X. So you have the people that aren't happy that we're not going on the pitch and getting games abandoned, which in my opinion is ridiculous, because like we can't afford to be losing points because we're getting games abandoned and things like that. But I think largely on the whole, everyone's fighting the same cause. Everyone is well aware of the constraints and is also well aware that it's terrible for fans. Like it's horrendous for fans, but it's also pretty bad for the players and the coaching staff. Like, from what I've seen, Sellers is completely unaware of all of the bad stuff that I just spoke about with Benjamin. The players have gone through periods where they have been eating microwave meals in the training ground because we haven't been able to hire chefs. We've had to travel to away games on the day of because we can't afford hotels. Like, even recently, and it's not the first team, it's the under-21s, we've had to pull out of competitions because we can't afford to send teams there. So again, I'm going around the houses here, but the fans are well aware that it's also really bad for the players, and all they really want to do is get behind those guys. And in return, the players are fighting. I keep saying on our podcast and on other podcasts I've been at, actually, being a Reading fan over a period of time, there's been quite a lot of players that we've had, probably a lot of the ones that I was talking to Benjamin about that we overspent on, that would play with very little passion, that wouldn't fly into tackles and wouldn't chase down, wouldn't track back. I don't think there's any players that we have currently that I could say that is true for. I think they all fight for the club, despite all the adversity that they're going through and despite all of the terrible times. Yeah, this team really does fight for the fans, and in return, you get the support from the fans. So it's quite a nice relationship at the moment. Like, the fans love Sellers, the fans love the players, and the players and sellers are fighting. So in that respect, I think, it's all going well on that front.
Yeah, I'm not going to be all negative. I promise you, and also I'll just shout really negatively. As Ben knows, I like to sort of do both views, positive, negative.
Yeah.
Oh, I tried to end on the positive though. You mentioned there about sort of Sellers being a sort of leader and being a sort of main man at the forefront. Obviously, there's been a lot of jobs at the moment, both in the Championship and lower end Premier League, that have become available. I'm not saying Sellers would go, or he's even got his eye on jobs. Is there a sort of factor from fans that are a little bit anxious about the possibility of him leaving? Because as we know, Dai Yongge isn't going to go and back him in the market. He can't do that because of the embargo. If Sellers gets a chance to prove himself with the utmost respect, to prove himself in a higher standard of league where he's going to get backed, it's hard not to say no.
No, I'm well aware of that, and I honestly think that if that is the case, that Reading fans would be very supportive of him because of what he's already done for us. I mean, he could have walked ages ago, months ago. He's had so many opportunities where he could have just left. Like he doesn't need to go through all of this. Like he could just throw the towel in and get out. But I am more concerned now that, as you say, there are roles becoming available, the Cardiff role, etc. That every time I see one, I'm like, oh, God, they're going to want Sellers, aren't they? And so far, we've managed to get away with it. But I'm sure you guys have seen, he did do an interview after the COIG collapse saying, or I can't remember the exact word, so I don't want to misquote, but sort of suggesting I'm coming to the end of my tether with all of this stuff. Which, as I say, I couldn't blame him at all. I really worry if Southampton get rid of Russell Martin, which is probably not too unlikely, that they might come back in for Sellers, or even some of the top teams in the Championship might come in for Sellers. And I think, I mean, like, he'd probably be quite silly to turn them down if I'm thinking about it on a personal level. Like, he's a young manager that has big aspirations, and what he's done for us has been absolutely fantastic. Then I don't think we could begrudge him if he took a new opportunity. I mean, I'd be really upset if he took a new opportunity in League One or down the bottom of League One, but anywhere out of League One, I think I'd have to hand it to him and say, fair play, mate, like you completely deserve it. And I genuinely think he is the best manager in League One at the moment. And I think we're really, really, really lucky to have him. So, as I say, I'd be very upset, but I wouldn't begrudge him snapping up an opportunity in a higher league, not at all.
Yeah, this will be the sort of the last negative point I do make as we move on to sort of the games. It does get positive. I assure you, it gets positive. I've got loads of compliments to pay the squad and everything. This is the last negative point I've got, and it's probably one that you've heard a million times before. It's about the away form this season. I know you can't underestimate the teams in which you played away, the likes of Birmingham City on your opening day, travelling to Wrexham, Bolton, who seem to be here, there and everywhere in terms of the way they're playing. I mean, that's just the league. You look at the League Cup, you look at the disappointment against Colchester, but then again, with a club in your position, is it easier in effect? Is that old saying, isn't it? Concentrate on the league, forget the rest of the cups. You look in the next game coming up, it's away at Rotherham. They've been a massive disappointment so far, to put it straight, but we all know the quality in which they possess. So is there room for us like criticism on Sellers? Because he is very reluctant with a 4-3-3. Does he need to perhaps change that up away from home?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know if I'm prepared to say anything negative about him, to be honest, in this position. But I mean, you're not wrong. The away form has been an issue. But if you cast your mind back to under Paul Ince as well, like our away form was what got us relegated. It was terrible, really, really bad. And obviously, we've not won away from home this season. But away at Birmingham, I thought we were the better side. Obviously, this is the first time that new Birmingham side had played, so they've improved since. I thought we were class, but Wrexham and Bolton, we just got completely blown out of the water. And I think when you have a squad as thin as ours, no matter how good they are in this league, with the amount of games we play, we're just going to get beat. Like, we're not going to win every game. And as long as we win the home games, I'm happy with that. I also do think, genuinely, just looking at the fixture list now to make sure I don't say anything too stupid. I'm pretty comfortable in saying it. We've played the 3 hardest away games this season. Every away game from here will be easier than the others. No, I mean, I'm not saying any of them will be easy because I'm not an idiot and I'm well aware that this is a super tough league. But Birmingham, Wrexham and Bolton, if you'd asked me at the start of the season, I probably would have had those 3 teams in the top 6. So that just shows how highly I respect them. So I'm not too worried about it, honestly. Like I genuinely think we go to Rotherham on Saturday and get a result, because I think they've been quite poor. They're no mugs, obviously. Like they've made some strong signings that just aren't firing yet. And it seems to be Reading's role quite often now. Like I've supported Reading for 25 years now, so I'm well used to it. That teams that are struggling will get a nice 3 points against Reading, particularly if they're the home side. But I think we can go there and get a result, and I think we'll pick up. So I'm not too concerned right now. Maybe if you ask me ask me on the 1st of January and we can talk about the concern, because if we haven't picked up any points on the road, then I will be slightly worried.
Right. I promise that's the last moment. We're on the positive stuff now.
Good.
It's the home form's been really good. To be fair, it's the 4th win in 5 for you boys now. Forget that Bolton game, it's the 4th win in 5. And again, you've played some real tricky sides. Look at Huddersfield. I know we've criticised Huddersfield this start of the season, been up and down. Burton are no easy sort of feat in this league. Charlton Athletic, between a win at home against them, was the one that really stood out for me, to be honest. I said in our previous show we done at the start of the season that Charlton are a side I was really excited by under Nathan Jones. It's a new project. So to host them and to get the victory there, that's a huge result. I think you look at your squad and the players that stand out to me despite the embargo. That midfield 3, as I really sort of like to see it. I know Charlie Savage perhaps isn't starting every game. I'm a big fan of him. You look at Lewis Swing, Harvey Nibbs. You're about to see my awful pronunciation. Kelvin, you know who I'm talking about. And Sam
Kelvin
Smith. Kelvin E, absolutely perfect. You look actually, Ben, go for it.
I'm not even going to try and I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. I'm going to absolutely butcher it.
I mean, you look at those players. You look at Sam Smith as well, top goal scorer so far with 3 goals for the club as well. It's a real good time to be excited.
No, mate, it really is. Like I've been doing a little bit of work the last couple of weeks of on the pod and also like just on Twitter of creating a case of why people should get down to the Select Car Leasing Stadium to watch Reading. And I think the biggest thing there is we have a really young squad that, as I've already talked about, play with a lot of passion, really exciting. And there's a lot of top quality young players with huge potential. Like the ones you mentioned, like I don't need to get started on. I could talk for days on how good they are, but the list does go on. Like Tyler Binden, super young. He looks class. Like I don't think he'd played a professional game until the start of last season, and all of a sudden he's like one of our best players for sure. We had Andre Garcia, who played against Huddersfield. I don't know if you guys got to see any of him, but he's 16 and he looked like he'd been playing for 10 years. Like, I don't know if this is all down to Sellers, but he's got these young players playing in such a lovely way with passion, looking super comfortable and playing nice attacking football. Like it's so good to watch, particularly at home. Like, I mean, almost all of it at home. The Birmingham game, I'd argue we did it to an extent. We did score 2 against Bolton, largely at home, and some of the wins at home. I think like Charlton going 1-0 down against Huddersfield. Don't think many Reading fans would have been too confident that we'd pull that back to win. And even scoring 3 against Burton, like, look, I know Burton aren't the best team in the world and they've got their own issues, but Reading don't usually score 3 goals. So, like, just the fact that we're scoring goals, we're looking a little bit tighter at the back. On the pitch right now with no injuries, because this will definitely change if there's injuries, there's so much to be positive about. So, to continue my plight to get people down to watch Reading games, get down to watch Reading games because this squad is awesome, and you will not regret it. You'll love watching them.
So with this current form going into October, it's a bit of an up and down month. You started away at Rotherham. The Barnsley game's been postponed, like a lot of games within League One, League Two, because of its national call-ups. I'm not going to mention the EFL Trophy because I like to keep this football league. So away at Rotherham, this has been postponed. At home against Crawley, away at Exeter, home to Bristol Rovers, and then away at Stockport. On paper, I know football isn't played on paper. That is a nice little run. I'm not saying, you probably exclude Rotherham away because I think they're a side that over the course of the season, they're going to get better and better. But Crawley, Exeter, Bristol Rovers, Stockport, you've sung your praises there. You've got to be licking your lips looking at those.
Yeah, I honestly, again, I need to be careful because, as I say, it literally will take one or two injuries for everything I said to be completely irrelevant. But I think you have to look at those 3 games and have 6 as the target. Well, 9 is the target, but 6 is the absolute minimum. I think we have to beat Crawley, we have to beat Bristol Rovers at home, and we're more than capable of going to Exeter and getting at least a point. I think, if not all 3. As I said, I already think we can get a point or more from Rotherham. So yeah, I think October could be a huge month for Reading, and obviously we have a game in hand on the guys around us. And I believe, if things haven't changed, I should have probably looked, that we're 2 points off the playoff. So I'd like to think, with those fixtures in October, that we could be within that top 6. So yeah, I am feeling very positive about those fixtures, and it could be a strong month for the Royals.
So my last point to you would be about what's the number one thing that's impressed you the most about your start to the season. For me, it's been where the goals have come from. You're not necessarily relying on a Sam Smith every week to score your goals. You're not relying on Charlie Savage also on 3 goals for the season. They come from all areas of the pitch. You look at Kelvin Ears chipped in, Lewis Wings chipped in, Harvey Nibbs chipped in, Tyler Saki's also got a goal to his name as well. So the fact you're not relying on one player, even if the worst happens, let's say Sam Smith gets injured tomorrow morning, having a likes of Kelvin Lee to back him up, it only plays into your armour, don't it?
Yeah, no, for sure, mate. I always don't get me wrong, I wouldn't be upset if Sam Smith went and scored 25 goals. Don't get me wrong, but I do like that it's being shared around, everyone's chipping in, and I think that is a testament, as I've spent this whole time talking about, that the players are playing for each other and they're playing with passion. No one's selfish, no one's greedy, everyone's knows their role and they're all fighting together. And I think you see that by the fact that the goals are so shared, which is great. It's such an interesting question. What have I been most impressed with? Because to be honest, I've been impressed across the board. The only, I can flip it actually. You wanted to talk positively, I can throw in one negative. My only big concern is Reading's goalkeepers. And that goes away when Pereira comes back, because I'm a big fan of Pereira and I think he's definitely good enough in this league, and he's probably towards the top in terms of goalkeepers in League One. But with David Button and Kanaya Boyce-Clark, we have 2 keepers that are quite short on confidence and, for want of a better word, aren't very good. So that's always a big worry with a very inexperienced back 4 in front of them. You really want a commanding and confident goalkeeper, which unfortunately, in Pereira's absence, we don't have. So that is my slight worry. But I guess I need to end it on a positive. My positive is that I genuinely think there's multiple positions where we have the best player, or one of the best players in the league in that position, and that is Lewis Wing in the centre mid. I think Sam Smith's one of the best strikers in the league, and Harvey Nibbs is fantastic. I love Harvey Nibbs so much. He has so much energy. He is so creative. I think he made the most tackles in the league last season. I may have got that wrong, so don't quote me on that, but he was definitely right up there. Yeah, honestly, I think he's so good. You see that for his goal against Huddersfield, was it? Where he's just chasing down, wins the ball back and thumps it into the corner. I've actually spent a bit of time, I mentioned it on our podcast last night, that if you take a look at the heat maps of Harvey Nibbs this season, and you didn't know what position he played, I guarantee you would not be able to tell me what position he plays. He is literally everywhere. Okay, you would be able to work out he's not a goalkeeper, but he's literally everywhere. He covers so much ground. And yeah, to be fair, the biggest positive we have is the fight. They're all fighting, and the home form's great. The away form could pick up, and I fully believe it will. But on the pitch, I genuinely have no reasons to be negative. So yeah, everything all good on the football side of things. The football side of things good.
Yeah, I think that goalkeeper sort of position that you mentioned there is quite an interesting position, to be honest, because look, being a goalkeeper myself, I'm always going to sympathise with goalkeepers. It is what it is. I think when you're a goalkeeper coming in with a very inexperienced back four in front of you, having all the noise behind you with the fans and the protests and the ownership, to be in that sort of solitary position, it's very, very difficult for a goalkeeper to come in and perform very highly. So to hear from yourself there's lack of confidence, it really doesn't surprise me, if I'm being perfectly honest. But those are the points I want to make. Ben, over to you, mate.
Yeah, so this has been a brilliant show so far. So finally, before we do go off the air, remind fans where they can find your podcast and when do you go live every week?
Yeah, of course. So we called the Royals Review Pod because we review games, which is slightly different to a lot of other podcasts that preview games. We take a look back. We do preview the next game as well, but we have taken that stance. So we'll go back and look at games, because I come from a stats background. I work for Who Scored, so I like to then look at the stats and then use that to kind of come up with a running order, which is why we do it that way. We're always active on X. We're active on TikTok as well, although I seem to have lost the login at the moment, so don't expect any new content from the last week, but we'll be back. On YouTube, if you're looking to get involved in the Royals Review podcast, yeah, head to our YouTube under the same name, or on Spotify if you prefer to listen there. We're also available on Amazon and Apple Music, I believe, but everywhere, literally everywhere. Just type in Royals Review Pod on wherever you listen to podcasts or whatever social media you use, and you'll find us.
And finally, time for all the plugs. Where can people find you on Twitter, Rhys?
Oh, darn, the hill is always Twitter. It's never X. It's at RhysCurtis14.
And same for you, Dan, your Twitter?
Mine is Dan Worth, but 2 N's, DANN Worth.
And you can find us on Twitter at OverTheBarFB. We will be back for another show next week. We do have plenty of Bundesliga and La Liga content coming out on the channel as well, so keep your eyes peeled for those. And yeah, thank you very much, Dan, for joining us here tonight. We've really enjoyed it. We are absolutely delighted to have you on the show. And until next time, I'm speaking absolute crap here because I can't find the outro. I've just found the outro. Until next time, good night.